Hey there, guys. Dragon Master here, and I want to welcome you to Star Wars in Earth, Episode 14, Codename War with Rachni. So, I really have nothing to say, really, so without a further ado, let's get straight into the video. We start our journey off with Thrawn, who has just arrived at Rachnis Prime with the small fleet and forces he has. And the scene currently in front of him isn't looking well. The defenders of the planet are currently, being overwhelmed along on the forces on the planet by the Rachni, who are currently taking over a few of the ships already. And with the other ships they've taken over, are crushing the Terran defenders. So Thrawn decides to split his forces up. He'll send the Krogan special units to the planet to deal with the Rachni, and then he'll send the ships to attack the Rachni fleet. But he needs to be smart about it. He'll first send in the fighters. So Thrawn does this plan and launches the Krogan special forces on transport ships below the planet, while the fighters attack the Rachni ships, and Thrawn's ships keep a distance from them to avoid being boarded or taken over. Thrawn then asks Shepard about Rachnis Prime and about how important it is. Shepard tells them that Rachnis Prime was a small colony in the mid-2 colonies and was probably their latest colony yet, but it had grown into a mid-turn colony. But Shepard says that the planet's mostly focused on farming, so it had a small population of a couple thousand. So really, it wasn't that important. So Thrawn decided that since it wasn't that important and it didn't have much history, that he could use brutal tactics. So he told the Krogan to do whatever they want to the planet, but they had to evacuate all the civilians and any of the soldiers who could not really fight the Rachni to get off the planet, and so that's what the Krogan did. They evacuated mostly everyone off the planet, and whatever Terran soldiers remained would help fight the Rachni with the Krogan forces. Thrawn's tactic was pretty smart. By using the fighters, the Rachni weren't able to take over the ships, so they had to move to get closer to Thrawn's ships, which allowed the fighters to attack them, leaving their defensive, fleet position they had made. And Thrawn used the heavy, high-range, long-range weapons on the ships to his advantage and opened fire at the Rachni ships while they were trying to reach them. Doing this caused damage significantly to the Rachni forces' ships. Thrawn then decided to head to the moon, basically to circle around it, and make the Rachni ships follow him. So that's what they did. They flew to the moon and circled around its gravitational orbit, forcing the Rachni to follow them. And when the Rachni reached the other side, Thrawn's ships were ready and opened fire on them, causing more damage. This strategy was brilliant on Thrawn's part, and the Krogan's brutal tactics put grenades, bombed places, burned trees, and entire farmlands to the ground. These battles went on for at least a whole week, as the ships were supplied with enough food to last at least 2 weeks. So the battles were bloody. Thrawn kept his distance using long-range weapons not to get closer to the ships in case of them boarding, because if the Rachni boarded the ships, it would be all over. And this strategy worked perfectly. After the whole week of intense fighting, the Rachni ships finally left, leaving their fellow Rachni on the planet to die. So Thrawn ordered the Krogan to push all of the Rachni to one single location, and they pushed them all the way to a forest, where Thrawn ordered the Krogan to retreat, and then he ordered the ship to bombard that forest to the ground and launch bombs and nukes. This plan worked, and, the entire forest and a quarter of the planet were bombarded and leveled, killing all the remaining Rachni on the planet. So Thrawn ordered the Krogan to pull out, and he decided to head to the next colony that was under attack. So they immediately went into hyperspace once the Krogan and what was left of the Terran forces that had stayed returned to the ship. While in hyperspace, Shepard was amazed at how brutal Thrawn had been, and also how well strategically he had planned this, and had defeated the Rachni forces in a week, which was impressive, as the other forces that had been sent were struggling against the Rachni due to the Rachni's numbers and intelligence. Thrawn decided to ask Shepard more about the Terran culture while they were currently heading to the next location. Shepard told him all about their history and about what, well, really had gone on for Earth for the past couple centuries, really. And Thrawn was impressed that the Terrans hadn't killed themselves, as such a war, basically wars happening every while or century or two, was impressive that they hadn't killed themselves, killed themselves off fighting each other. And he said that they were also very well in wars, and they fought pretty well. And Shepard thanked him, saying that he was a pretty good strategist himself, and Thrawn then chuckled about this. He thought Shepard was an interesting person, and unique in a way. As for Shepard's sister, she had retreated with all the civilians. She wanted to protect them and make sure they got back to Earth safely. So, on other news, Thrawn arrived at the next location and aided in the fight on that colony. And in a matter of couple of days, Thrawn and Shepard were able to push the Rachni off that world as well. And the forces that had been sent decided to join Thrawn in his continued battling against the Rachni. Thrawn went to the other locations, helping the Terrans fight the Rachni off their worlds. He pushed the Rachnis off the worlds and did heavy losses on them. And the Rachni fleets were forced to retreat all the way back to their planet. And Thrawn decided to push on. It had been at least a month or two since he had joined them, and he had pushed all the Rachni back to the home system. Thrawn then headed to Earth to gain more ships to help him. Anderson and Hackett, along with Houdini, were surprised at how effective Thrawn had been, and they immediately asked Thrawn how he was able to do all this, and Thrawn told them. Well, he didn't want to tell them, so he didn't tell them at all. He just said that it was quite simple, really, but that's all he elaborated on. So Anderson and Hackett's fleet joined Thrawn in his fleet he had gathered with all the forces that had been sent to take back the colonies from the Rachni, and they headed to the system. Thrawn, after spending a month or two, had taken a liking to the Terrans. He had also been studying the Empire and had noticed that the Empire had cracks in it, and that it was sort of like pebbles piled up. But if one pebble fell, then they would all fall. Thrawn realized that the Empire wasn't really that well structured. They had cheap ships and lots of personnel, and they weren't, their only effectiveness was really that they had a strong army. Well, a ginormous army. It wasn't that strong. Thrawn noted that the Terrans soldiers were much more better than the Imperial stormtroopers. The Empire may have had more Star Destroyers and ships, but the Terran ships were, better suited for living conditions, and they treated their, soldiers and all companions much better than the Empire did with its own personnel. He thought that the Terrans might be better than the Empire for the galaxy, so he was considering joining them instead of the Empire, but he didn't know yet. But right now he had to focus on defeating the Rachni. The Terrans arrived at the home planet of the Rachni, and Thrawn was time to use his genius mind and strategist mind to take down the Rachni and conquer their home world. So, Thrawn deployed a huge amount of Krogan forces. He had been gathering a lot of Krogan from their home planet and told them to basically land a distance away, basically in a secure position, and to work their way up and use any brutal tactic they want. And the Krogan were very happy about this. So they immediately launched transports and used fighters to cover them, while the fleet stayed its distance from the Rachni ships. Thrawn used heavy ships to take the frontal attack, as their armor would protect them in case of any boarding as well, and for the long-range ships to be behind them and fire their weapons, with the big armored ships covering them. This strategy worked, causing the first volley to damage the Rachni ships severely. While the Krogan forces landed and began their basically march, the Krogan battled through the Rachni, both suffering heavy losses, but the Krogan did not give up, no matter how much losses they took. Thousands of Krogan marched their way through the Rachni's planet, taking down many Rachni and suffering hundreds of losses. But Thrawn gave the Krogan a special order after a couple of days, and he ordered them to take down, well, at least destroy half of the Rachni queens, as this would severely and do a lot of damage to the Rachni. So they did. They headed to the main, well, they tried to locate the main nest of where the Rachni were situated. And they were able to locate it, and they told Thrawn the location. Thrawn ordered basically fighter bombardment squad to fly over it and launch bombs on it, and to try and flush them out. And this worked. The Rachni queens retreated, but the Krogan forces were waiting, and they immediately attacked, attacking the Rachni queens and killing half of them. The other half were captured, and with that, Thrawn had taken down the Rachni's leadership. And as for him in space right now, he had destroyed half of the Rachni's fleet and had only suffered a quarter of their losses. With this, Thrawn told the Rachni to surrender, and the Rachni, under the Queen, well, the Rachni queens ordered their forces to surrender, and it was a Terran victory. United Nations Space Command took control of their planet and forced all of the Rachni into caves that were heavily guarded and monitored to make sure they would not cause any trouble, and set traps in case they tried to leave. They set up bases and outposts to keep an eye on the Rachni as well, and kept a small fleet in orbit. They also set at least one nuke bomb located on the planet, and to nuke in case all of the Rachni ever gathered up. And after the war, the Krogan were rewarded with basically many new they could take a pick of as many colonies as they wanted to, and the Krogan were grateful. But the Terrans also offered them to guard the Rachni's homeworld, and the Krogan agreed to this, sending huge portions of their forces to guard the Rachni, who the Krogan considered a worthy adversary. As for Thrawn, it had been a couple of months since he had won the battle. He was a hero. He was rewarded a medal, and the Terrans offered him basically his own place to stay. Thrawn spent the next couple months on Earth studying the culture and learning about United Nations Space Command. He learned about their history more and more, and he was deeply interested in it. And he realized that the United Nations Space Command was much better than the Empire ever could be. But something even more shocking happened. The Terrans contacted Palpatine, and Palpatine had sent him an offer after hearing about what he had done. Palpatine offered him to join him. He would basically be sent to the academy for at least 3 months, and then afterwards, on how well he did, he would be given any lower position he could give aboard a Star Destroyer or any Star Imperial cruiser that Palpatine needed new recruits. And Thrawn thought about this. So he had also been given another offer by the Terrans to become basically a captain of one of their ships. It was a new design prototype ship that the Terrans were working on. It wasn't like the newer model that was now being distributed across the fleet. So he thought about this, and after a couple of days of thinking, he finally made his decision, and he went to talk to Anderson and Hackett to tell him his decision. And that is where we are going to leave it off. So I want to thank you all for watching this video. I also have one thing to say. Sorry if this video has been released a day late after it was supposed to release. I've had basically I've been busy, so yeah, that's really all I have to say. So thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Also, please leave comment down below, and thank you.